Hi guys, welcome back. In this video, we're going to be discussing the October-November 2022 paper that was recently held on the 15th of November. This is paper 12. So let's get started. Question number 1 says, what is the function of money? The function of money is to act as a medium of exchange. Simple question. So the answer is A. Question 2 says, in a planned economic system, what will determine the allocation of scarce resources? Now we know that a planned economic system is a system where the government is controlling all the major aspects of the economy and the economic production, right? It makes all the decisions of resource allocation. So the question number 2 should be for boy the decision of the central government. Question number 3 says a key concept in classifying goods is whether a good is rival or non-rival. Which good is rival in consumption? Now a good is rival, which can be possessed or which can be consumed by a single user. So if someone consumes it, then it won't be available for anybody else to consume, as in the utility for others will diminish, right? So, and private goods are rival goods, so that makes A the correct answer. And ice cream, because street lighting, radio broadcast, and the internet are public goods, they are non-rival goods, right? Question number 4 says, what is a normative statement? A normative statements are statements that are opinions, they are subjective statements, and they sort of carry a value judgment. So a firm receiving government subsidy will increase the supply of a goods. Yes, definitely. If you sort of give a subsidy that increases the supply, it reduces the cost. And that is a positive statement because this could be tested as well. And from the available evidence, we can either accept or reject it. So it's a positive statement. Question B says, part B says, negative externalities are the most serious market failure. This definitely carries a value judgment because it could be my opinion. I mean, maybe for someone else, negative externalities might not be the most serious, although they are sort of market, as in they are market failures, but not the most serious for maybe someone else as well, right? So it's certainly an opinionated, subjective view. So question number 4 should be boy. Question number 5 says the diagram shows an economy's production possibility curve. The economy has moved from X to Y. So if you see from this diagram that point X is a point that is inside the curve, and we are moving from point X to point Y that is on the curve. So if you move from X to Y, you're utilizing your existing resources more efficiently. So the correct answer should be boy. The economy has become more efficient. That's the correct answer. Question number 6 says an indirect tax is imposed on a product, causing total expenditure by consumers to increase. Which row identifies this situation? Now, an indirect tax is an expenditure tax imposed on the product that would cause your supply to shift to the left, causing the price to go up. Now, as far as the price is concerned, the answer should either be from C or D, because the price should definitely go up. If the price goes up, remember, and if the demand is inelastic, that is, if the PD is less than 1, right, then your quantity demanded basically is gonna contract, right? Quantity demanded would go down, quantity demanded would contract, but relatively less. So the price effect is more than the quantity effect. Definitely, the increase in price would offset the fall in quantity demanded, in the sense that your total expenditure would go up because the price is increasing and your total expenditure would be going up, because since your price is going up, your quantity is going down, but then the increase in price offsets the decrease in quantity demanded, so your total expenditure goes up, right? Because total expenditure is price times quantity, okay? That should make D for David the correct answer. The price is going up while the PD is inelastic. Question number 7 says the price elasticity of supply of yogurt is plus 1.5. It's elastic. If the demand for yogurt rises and subsequently the price rises, how much more will be supplied to the market? So it's a fairly simple question. You just need to plug in the values in the PES formula. So PES equals to percentage change in quantity demand supplied over percentage change in price. So the percentage change in quantity supplied should be 30% divided by the percentage change in price is 20%. That would give the answer 1.5, and so, as in that makes D the correct answer. 7 should be D for David. Question number 8 says the diagram shows the market demand and supply of a good. Which statement is not valid? Which statement is not valid? So let's see what are the valid statements. So option A says that at a price of OP1, UV represents market surplus. So at OP1, definitely UV does represent market surplus, since this is the quantity supplied while this is the quantity demanded. So all of this entire distance and this area shaded region is representing your surplus, right? Now moving forward, as in the answer option B says at a price of OP3, P3X represents the quantity that consumers are willing and able to buy. So at P3, P3X is representing. So at P3, this is representing this point is representing your quantity demanded. So basically P3X, that is this entire distance is representing the quantity demanded for the consumers, because let's say if the quantity is 100, so from 0 to 100 is representing this area, this distance is representing the quantity demanded by the consumers, which is also equal to this distance as well, and hence that, so option B is correct as well. So they're asking the wrong option. So option C says the price were to fall from OP1 to OP3, the extra quantity that was demanded would be equal to the extra quantity. Now, if the price was OP1, so at OP1 you had a surplus, right? So from a surplus, you would have moved to a shortage. So the value of the surplus would be definitely be equal to the value of the shortage. But then option C is the correct answer, because it says if the price were to fall from OP1 to OP3, the extra quantity demanded would be equal to the extra quantity supplied. Now, the point is that at OP1, there's no extra quantity demanded. There's extra quantity supplied, because let's say the supply is 10 while the demand is 7. So you have the extra quantity supplied is 3 units. 3 units is basically the surplus or the extra quantity supplied. And if you move from OP1 to OP3, then at OP3, your quantity demanded is sort of 10, while your quantity supplied is basically, you know, is somewhere around. This should be your quantity supplied, right? Just a second, I've made the line, but just let me do it like this. So yeah, so the quantity supplied should be somewhere around 7 at this point. Yeah, at this intersecting supply over here. So basically, yeah, so basically 10 minus 7 is now representing your shortage, because it's representing excess demand. So 3 is your shortage. So from surplus, you move from a 3 surplus, you move through a 3 shortage. Here it is saying the extra quantity demanded would equal to the extra quantity supplied. It should be the other way around, that it should be the extra quantity supplied should be equal to the extra quantity demanded. That makes C the incorrect answer. So that statement is sort of invalid, while option D is correct, because as in this is a valid statement, because OP2 is the market equilibrium price, right? Okay, question number 9 is a good question. It says the diagram shows two linear supply curves labeled S1 and S2, where S2 is a 45-degree line. Which statement about the PES is correct? Now remember that whenever the supply curve would start from the origin, the PES, the value of the PES would always be equal to unity, right? And the thing is that while remember if whenever your PES is greater than 1 or PES is less than 1, that is whenever the price elasticity of supply is elastic or inelastic, your PES, the value of your elasticity across the line of your supply curve, as you move up the supply curve, the value of that elasticity changes, right? But if your supply curve starts from the origin, your PES would not only be equal to 1 for both the curves, but it would be constant throughout as well. So remember that whenever your PES equals to 1, it starts from unity. It's not only equal to unity, but it's constant throughout the curve as well, at any point on the curve as you move up the curve, for both the curves, S1 and S2. So although remember that S1 and S2 have different slopes, guys, they have different slopes, but PES equals to 1 for both the curves and is constant throughout. While if the PES was greater than 1 or less than 1, if the supply was elastic or inelastic, remember that as we move up the curve, the elasticity changes. So the correct answer should be 9, should be D. The price elastic supply is unitary elastic at every point along S1 and S2. Question number 10 says a country has a healthcare provided by the free market. So the free market output is given. So I'll draw this demand and supply. So this is demand, this is supply, basically. So the free market output is given, and the free market output is, let's say, 10 units, right, for healthcare, which is replaced by the government provision of SG free. It's SG free healthcare. So the government says that, you know what, we're going to be providing. We are going to be providing healthcare that is equivalent to, let's say, 15 units, and you have a government provision line. Let's say this is the point, as in the government is providing 15 units of healthcare, and now basically sort of what's happening is that what is the change in consumer surplus? So if this was the free market output, then this entire triangle was representing consumer surplus, which is the area above the price below the demand. So this was your consumer surplus. Now the point is, guys, that it says, so at 10 units, guys, at 10 units, and the government is providing it for free. So let's see that at 15 units, that as in the healthcare is provided by the government, and at 15 units of the healthcare provision, let's say, at 15 units of the healthcare provision, at 15 units, basically, let's see where this point intersects the demand curve. So this point intersects the demand curve over here. So remember that the demand curve represents your willingness and ability to pay. And the entire area that is below the demand curve would be so if you're consuming basically 15 units that the government is providing, so that area under the demand curve for those 15 units would be representing the total utility or the total satisfaction the consumer would be getting from consuming those 15 units, which obviously means that that area would sort of represent the value the consumer is placing on those 15 units of healthcare, which obviously means that that would represent the consumer's the willingness and ability to pay for those units, because the satisfaction the consumer would receive would be the value the consumer would place on those 15 units, which would equal to the consumer's willingness and ability to pay for those units. And sort of this entire area, as in if I were to draw this, so this entire area, basically this area would represent the consumer's total satisfaction or utility derived from these 15 units, and the value the consumer places for those 15 units, and the satisfaction the consumer places for those 15 units, and the consumer's willingness and ability to pay for those 15 units as well, because that is the satisfaction the consumer gets or the utility the consumer gets. So this area is representing that. Now the thing is that the consumer surplus is equal to what the consumer is willing to pay minus what the consumer actually pays, right? W stands for the willingness of the consumer to pay minus the market price of the product. Now we know that the areas that is represented by the consumer's willingness and ability to pay is area 1, area 2, area 3, and area 4, because I said that all of this area is representing the consumer's willingness and ability to pay or the utility derived from consuming 15 units of healthcare. Now the thing is, guys, the point is that since all of these units are sort of consumed for free, the government is providing it for free, so there's nothing, so there's zero price basically, right? There's zero price. So the only thing is the willingness to pay. So all of that area, that is area 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, would be the entire consumer surplus, because the thing is that the consumer is not paying anything, right? So whatever the utility the consumer receives, that utility would be the entire consumer surplus. So the entire consumer surplus is the entire utility or satisfaction the consumer receives, or the entire consumer surplus is the entire that area, as in the consumer surplus is whatever the consumer is willing to pay for those units based on what he's getting out of those units in terms of satisfaction and value. That is the consumer surplus itself, because he's not paying anything for consuming those units, right? So that is why the consumer surplus should be equivalent to the value of what he's willing to pay, or the utility derived from those units, which is the area under the demand curve, right? So the consumer surplus should rise from, it's question 10. So the consumer surplus should rise from 1 to 1, 2, 3, and 4. So the initial consumer surplus was 1, and now it is 1, 2, 3, and 4 for consuming those 15 units. So the correct option should be B, boy. What is an example of a product in joint demand? Joint demand with a smartphone. Obviously, joint demand is a good that is representing goods that are complements. So if you're buying a smartphone, then headphones would be could be your complementary goods or in joint demand. So question number 12 says a product has a high price elastic supply. What might explain this? So, as in the price elastic supply is representing or showing the responsiveness, sensitivity of the producer to sort of increase output in response to changes in price. So basically, question number 12, obviously, if the product, if it's a high PES, which means that it's elastic, right? So basically, it should be non-perishable in nature, because if it's non-perishable, the elasticity would be high, because the producer could easily sort of increase output and probably maybe store it up in a warehouse, since the product is non-perishable, so the product would not be damaged or perish so quickly. So that makes it more convenient for the producer to produce in bulk and produce a higher quantity, or probably store it as well. That makes the supply elastic. Question number 13 says, what is likely to affect the position of the demand curve for tickets to a pop-up concert, but not the position of supply curve, which means that what would sort of shift the demand curve to the right or left, but not the supply curve, right? So a change in income would definitely shift the supply curve to the right. So this seems like the right answer. B says a change in the price of tickets to the concert. So a change in the price of the tickets to the concert would sort of extend the demand as well and extend the supply as well. But we are talking about shifting the position of the curves, right? So B is not the correct answer. Change in rents would shift the supply curve. We are talking about a shift in demand. So yeah, and the seating capacity would also shift the supply. So basically A is the correct answer, 13A. 14 says the table shows Lee's and Yim's PED for restaurant meals and cinema tickets. There is a rise in the price of both products. What can definitely be concluded after these price changes? So Lee's restaurant meals elasticity is minus 1.2. It's sort of elastic. It's greater than 1. While cinema tickets is less than 1, while Yim both is inelastic. So PED for restaurant meals and cinema for Yim is inelastic. The restaurant owners will receive more income. So the option B, if you look at option B, it says Lee will spend more money on both the products, and that is the correct answer for 14. Because if you sorry not Lee, it's actually Yim. Yim will spend more money on both products because the elasticity for Yim for both the products such as restaurants and cinema is inelastic. And remember that whenever the PED is less than 1 and if the price goes up, the total expenditure of the consumer goes up because because the reason is that if the price goes up, the quantity demanded contracts, it goes down, but the extent to which it contracts go is relatively less, and the price effect is more than the quantity effect, and then the increase in price offsets the fall in quantity such that total expenditures for the consumer and total revenues for the firms increase, right? That makes C the correct answer. Question 15 says a government fixes the maximum price for a product in order to increase its consumption. What would be the likely outcome of such policy? We know what maximum prices are. Maximum prices involve the government sort of making a normative judgment that the market clearing price is too high, and then it needs to sort of reduce the price. And one of the reasons could possibly be that maybe the good is essential for living. So if the government imposes the maximum price, if this is demand, this is supply, and this was your equilibrium, while this is your maximum price now, so that would result into a rise in quantity demanded, while the quantity supplied would go down from this to quantity supplied goes down from Q to QS1, while quantity demand rises from Q to Q1. So there's a shortage, and the quantity supply goes down. So the correct answer option is sort of 15 should be D. That is, production will fall if the maximum price is below the current equilibrium, right? So that makes D the correct answer. Okay, so question number 16 says that a diagram shows demand and supply curves for a good. S1 is the original supply curve, while S2 is the supply after tax. So basically, due to an indirect tax, the supply is shifted to the left. And how much tax revenue is earned by the government? So basically, remember that the vertical distance between the two supply curve represents a tax per unit. So the tax per unit is basically this distance, and the value of this distance would be 16 minus 6, which would give us the tax per unit. That is 10 is the tax per unit, right? Multiply by how many units are being bought and sold, 20. So obviously, the tax revenue that would be collected by the government is $200. So that makes 16C the correct answer. Question number 17 says, what is a transfer payment? It's an easy question. Now, we know that transfer payments are those payments against which, it's just a transfer of payment from one party to the other party, and against which no trade or exchange of goods is made, right, or done. So in that sense, it makes B the correct answer, because the allowance or the money that is given by a parent to a child is simply a transfer of money from one person to the other while the child is at school, because against that money the child is not producing or selling something to the parent, right? So yeah, because there's no economic activity taking place, while if you look at the other answer options, there is an economic activity taking place. So 17 is B. 18, what best illustrates the process of privatization? Again, an easy question. Privatization is simply the transfer of public ownership and control of the state's business and industry to the private sector. That should make D for David the correct answer. Question number 19 says, what defines a progressive tax? Now, guys, progressive tax is a tax that takes a higher percentage of tax from people who have higher incomes, right? Which means that the more a person earns, the higher is the proportion of his income he would pay in tax. And this is usually done to sort of help reduce the income inequality, and so basically, which means that a progressive tax takes a lower average levels of tax from low wage earners and more from high wage earners. That makes B, boy, the correct answer. Low income earners pay a low proportion of income in taxes than high income earners. Question 20 says an increase in what will shift the aggregate demand curve to the right. We know that the aggregate demand curve it's a measure of total expenditure or spending in the economy. So if there's a budget deficit, it means that the government spending is more than the tax revenues, which definitely means that it's a sign of expansionary demand side policy. Although it is debt fueled, there would be a budget deficit, and the government would be needing to finance that deficit somehow through borrowing. But then yes, ultimately, the ultimate impact on aggregate demand would be that because of a rise in government spending, your aggregate demand curve would rise because it's a sign of expansionary fiscal policy. So 20 is A. 21, which effect of inflation is described as redistributive. We know that inflation redistributes income. It creates an unequal distribution of income, and the reason why the income redistribution is basically sort of it's the that income redistribution is considered, it's more like concerned with the regressive effect on lower income families and old people in society, because of inflation. We know that the prices of food and those domestic utilities such as water, gas, heating is rising very rapidly, and against that the incomes are not rising at the same pace, or maybe people on fixed incomes are just fixed. They are on fixed incomes. Incomes are not rising, and that causes a redistribution of income, away from the poor to the rich. It causes an unequal distribution of income. So that is why 21 should make D the correct answer, David. So in 22 says, in which situation will a country's terms of trade improve? Now, guys, we know that the terms of trade refers to our index of average price of exports over index of average price of imports times 100, right? So it's the index of average prices of exports, and okay, so it's average price, index of average price of exports over the index of the average price of imports times the 100, so that we get an answer in index number. Now 22 should be C, because terms of trade would improve if the export prices are rising faster or relative to import prices, and that makes C the correct answer, because it says that the price of its imports rises by less than the price of exports. That would improve the TOT. Question 23 says, basically, country X joins a custom union with country Y and will remove the tariff on import of good M from country Y. Okay, so country X is joining the custom union with Y, and because of the custom union, the tariff will be removed, and country X was importing the good from country Y. So under which condition will trade creation be the largest? Now, it's a good question, but I just wanted you to brief what a custom union is. So custom union, guys, is basically, it occurs when a group of the countries, they agree to have a free trade, right? They agree to have free trade amongst themselves, amongst the union, amongst the zone, and they agree on a common sort of an external tariff to countries who are outside the union or zone. So there would be free trade amongst the member countries, which would allow more trade creation, right? And because of the reduction of the tariff barriers, now the trade creation sort of refers to an increase in the economic welfare. So because of trade creation and the removal of the tariff barriers, your economic welfare would be rising, and and because you're removing the tariff barriers and you're removing the tariffs, so production would be now focused on more lower cost countries, which would reduce the prices, and obviously that sort of switches that switches the output to lower cost producers, and that causes a lowering prices, and that causes increase in consumer surplus and also increase in economic welfare. Now that is exactly the purpose of trade creation, that when you remove the trade barriers from, or the tariff barriers from, the member countries, so your economic welfare goes up, because now the production is shifted to lower cost producers, and that causes lower prices, and then since they are more competitive and cost effective, and that causes increasing consumer surplus and economic welfare. And the the question is asking you, under which conditions will this benefit be maximized, as in the benefit of economic welfare and trade creation and increasing consumer surplus? When would this be maximized? So obviously it would be maximized when the size of the tariff is larger, because the larger the size of the tariff, and once you remove that large tariff, obviously greater would be the trade creation. But for that to work, obviously the price elasticity of demand for good M in country X has to be elastic, because if it's inelastic, then it sort of won't work. But if it's elastic, and the greater the size of the tariff, then the more greater impact on economic welfare um, would that result into, right? So that makes B the correct answer. 23 should be B. Now, question number 24 says, what is likely to happen if there is a fall in the international value of a country's currency? A fall in the international value of the currency means that a currency gets weaker in terms of the other currency, and there's a depreciation of the currency. If the currency depreciates, basically, let's suppose a dollar is worth maybe 100 rupees, and now a dollar is sort of worth 50 rupees. So basically, dollar depreciates, dollar gets weaker. So the price of exports goes down the price of U.S. exports goes down for people in Pakistan, because we're talking about Pakistani rupees here. So the price of U.S. exports goes down for the people in Pakistan and for the Pakistani firms. and that causes a rise in the quantity of exports. That should rise, assuming that the price elasticity of demand for exports is elastic in Pakistan. So for the US exports, so there would be a rise in the volume of its exports. So 24 should be B. 25 says from the same quantity of the factors of production, country X and country Y each produce the following units of output. Which statement is correct? So this is a question on absolute comparative advantage. So let's take sugar and textiles here, and this is country X, this is country Y. So 30 and 20, let's take the ratio. So this would be 1.5 is to 1, and this should be 4 is to 1. Always take a common number, as in take, you should always have a common ground so that you can compare the opportunity cost. For that, divide 30 by 20 and 40 by 10, so it will give you 1.5 is to 1 and 4 is to 1. Now, so simply telling us, if you see that country Y has a comparative advantage in sugar because it could produce 4 units of sugar by just giving up 1 unit of textile, compared to country X, which can only produce 1.5 sugar, and at the same time it has to give up the same one textile, right? So country Y definitely has a comparative advantage in sugar because it could produce 4 sugar by giving up the same 1 unit of textile as that of country X, right? So that makes D, David, the correct answer. Country Y has a comparative advantage in the production of sugar. You have a comparative advantage when you can produce something at a lower opportunity cost, right? So question number 26 says that following a depreciation in the dollar value of the pound sterling, a UK exporter leaves the dollar price of the goods it sells in the US market unchanged. Okay. Other things being equal, what will be the effect on the revenue measured in sterling obtained by the manufacturer from its sales in the US? Now, this is an interesting question. So I'm going to break it down. So it says that following, now the 10% figure is irrelevant to us right now. Following a depreciation in the dollar value of sterling. Now, this means is that if, let's suppose, so it's telling us that pound is being depreciated, sterling is depreciated because it's saying that the depreciation occurs in the dollar value of the sterling, right? So depreciation occurs in the sterling, but the dollar value of the sterling. So if 1 pound equals to, let's say, $5, assuming now the pound depreciates and becomes the dollar value goes to 2. 1 pound is now worth $2, right? Now, this is just one scenario. So this is just one thing that has happened, right? Then it says that a UK exporter leaves the dollar price of the goods it sells in the US market unchanged. Now, for example, if Adil is a UK exporter, it exports goods to US, and the goods so what I'm going to do is that, for example, if Adil's goods, who is a UK exporter based in UK, and my goods are lying in the US, and let's suppose my goods lying in the US, so the original price of my goods in US were, let's say, $5, right? That was the original price of my goods. That was the original price of my goods in US, $5, and now it says that I have left that price unchanged. It sells in the US market unchanged. So if I've left that price unchanged, so the new price of the unit of my goods in US, so the new price is still $5. So I haven't changed it, right? It's still the same. Now let's assume, so the original price in US is $5 for 1 unit, and for the same 1 unit it's still $5. So now let's suppose if I sell 1 unit, if someone in the US buys my goods for $5, he buys a unit. So how much revenue will I get in dollars? The revenue in dollars that I will get if 1 unit is being sold is $5, right? So I'll get $5 basically. So $5 would be my revenue in US. Now they're asking that, other things being equal, what will be the effect on the revenue that is measured in sterling? So now if $5 is the revenue in dollars, right? So if I convert that into sterling, so that should be how many sterlings? That should be that should be actually 2 sterlings. Now this was assuming the depreciation was from 1 pound was worth $5 to 1 pound being $2.5 was a mistake. I should have written 2.5. So basically what's happening here is that now I have received $5, right? I've received $5, and now the value of $5 in sterling. So how much revenue have I received in sterling now? I've received sort of 2 pounds now, because 1 pound is worth $2.5, so $5 would be worth 2 pounds, right? Because 1 pound is worth $2.5, so $5 will be worth 2 pounds. So the revenue in sterling or pound would be how much? 2 pounds, right? That's it. That was the simple thing. So the revenue in sterling would rise because initially my revenue was £1. If the pound had not been depreciated, so if I would have sold the goods, I would have sold it for $5 in US, but I would in sterling the revenue would have been equal to £1, right? But now the revenue in sterling would be equal to two pounds because a pound is now $2.5. So $5 is worth £2 now. So the revenue should rise. So 26, that makes 26 as A the correct answer. 27 says the diagram shows the effect of introducing a tariff on a product. What determines the producer surplus that tariff generates for domestic producers? Now, obviously, tariff would increase the price of the imports, and that would cause a loss of consumer surplus. So this entire area is representing a loss of consumer surplus, but obviously some of that area is redistributed as a gain to producer surplus as well. So now we know that producer surplus is a welfare gain to producers, right? So what would determine the size of the producer surplus? So definitely the tariff rate would determine the size of the producer surplus, because the tariff rate would determine the extent to which the price is actually going up. So the higher the price, the higher the producer surplus, right? Because okay, so and secondly, the elasticity of supply would also depend would also determine the size of the producer surplus. So by the way, this area, this in this area is basically representing the gain in producer surplus, by the way, right? So so the thing is that what determines the size of the producer surplus? Your tariff rate and your price plus your domestic supply should determine the price of your producer surplus. So moving forward, question number 28 says, um, uh, you know which government policy is most likely to cause expenditure switching that will benefit a country's current account, which should benefit a country's current account. Now, expenditure switching, we know what expenditure switching is. Expenditure switching policy are those policies that aim to switch the consumer spending towards domestic goods, right? Instead and away from imports, right? So if you sort of increase the subsidies to domestic firms would get competitive, their cost of production would go down, and the domestic prices in the economy would go down. So consumers would, instead of buying imports, they will buy domestic goods. So that makes D the correct answer. Question number 29 says, which type of economic policy is likely to be considered the most effective by the government that has greater income equality as its primary aim? So a policy that has income equality as a primary aim should be fiscal policy, because the tools of fiscal policy are taxes and government spending. So the government could sort of implement progressive taxes as part of its fiscal policy, increase direct taxes, basically that are progressive taxes, more high in like increasing income taxes and corporate taxes that will result into more income inequality in the economy, and the government could sort of spend that money of I mean the revenue generated from those taxes as well back on the economy in the form of more welfare payments, and also that should bridge the gap between the rich and poor and create more income equality. That makes 29A as the correct answer. Spending more in the economy by the government forms part of government spending, by the way. So question 29A is the correct answer. Question number 30 says the diagram shows four possible AS curves. Equilibrium point is given as X. A government employs deflationary fiscal policy. Deflationary fiscal policy means reducing aggregate, so basically increasing taxes and reducing the government spending. The objective is to reduce aggregate demand. Basically, in order to reduce the rate of inflation in its economy, this shifts 80 to 82. With which AS curve would this policy be most effective? So basically, what we need to see over here is that since aggregate demand is going down, your price level or inflation should go down. But it would obviously depend upon your aggregate supply curve as well. To what extent inflation would go down, or to what extent would deflation occur, basically depends upon your shape of your aggregate supply curve. So the correct answer to 2030 should actually be A, because that is where the most the biggest deflation occurs. Because if I actually, what I'll do is that if this is your aggregate demand, right? If this is your aggregate demand, and if this is your aggregate supply, if A is your aggregate supply, right? So this is your equilibrium, and then what happens is that your aggregate demand shifts to the left, and then this is your new equilibrium. So basically, so if you see that this decline is the largest decline. From P1 to P2 is your largest decline, because if you see any other aggregate supply curve, let's say that you take, so A is the correct answer, but if you take B as an example as well, let's say you want to say that no, I want to take, let's see B. So if you see B as an example, then at B, the decrease in price level would occur over here, because here is where the AD2 would intersect the supply curve at B, and then the decline in price would be till here, right? But our decline in price in A is still here, till down there, right? So that makes, A the correct answer. And if you look at D, and if you look at C, by the way, if you look at C, so C is so there's an even lesser decline in price if you look at C. So it declines till only here. And if you look at D, so at D there's no change in price because the original price is here and then AD shifts to the left. So the price level is still the same. So that makes A the correct answer, guys. So that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video and you can check your answers from there. Good luck for your results. Take care. Bye bye.